Bona tarda a tothom, gràcies per venir. Aquesta és la segona conferència del cicle d'aquest any que organitza Arquitectes per l'Arquitectura, l'associació que organitzen aquests cicles des de fa 5 anys, i estem molt contents de poder-vos presentar avui la xerrada del despatx dublinès del Tuomey i la Sheila O'Donnell, els que presentarà l'Elías Torres. Faran una petita presentació, després ells passaran a explicar la seva obra, que crec que donat que no han estat en gaires ocasions a Barcelona, serà interessant que en facin un repàs extens, i després l'Elías havia plantejat algunes preguntes per intentar treure una mica més de suc a la seva presentació, en el que esperem que sigui un diàleg interessant per tots vosaltres. Bé, presentar-los és una mica complicat. Presentar l'Elías Torres, suposo que tots el coneixeu, la seva pràctica professional extensíssima, juntament amb el José Antonio Martínez Lapeña, que van rebre el Premi Nacional d'Arquitectura l'any passat, entre molts d'altres guardons que han anat tenint tot aquest temps, i la veritat és que em fa com cosa presentar-lo, així que el deixarem que ell sigui també qui presenti a la Sheila i al John, que són Riba Gold Medal, i que ara l'Elías us explicarà un guardó que ha rebut recentment la Sheila i que estem contents de compartir-lo amb vosaltres. A partir d'aquí, sense voler treure més temps perquè després s'allarguen massa les conferències, passo la paraula a l'Elías, que introduirà la conversa. Elías?
Gràcies. Es sent? Sheila O'Donnell and John Tuomey, a Dubliner couple, a team of great architects, internationally well known, and with offices in Ireland and in London. And to point only two things, the one that already Omar has said, to point out to recent significant recognitions of their office as the very recent RIBA gold medal, and that is the second best world award after the Pritzker. I think so, right? Okay. And Sheila has just won the WIA as Women's in Architecture just 1 month ago. Okay.
Less.
Congratulations. Thank you. When Omar Ornake asked me to have one of the conversations at the AA series sponsored by Trespa and Scoffet, I felt messy up and trap. But I was not able to refuse this one. Friendship is priority. It's a priority. I needed to find a strategy to respond to the challenging request, and at the same time to find a comfortable way to escape it. For today's encounter with Sheila and John, I have tried to avoid a more classic interview, and this is why we have prepared a copy. The one was published at the AV Monographies, and the interviewer was Laura Fernandez, and the title is Dublin Dialogue. And I think the spirit that guides your work or their work, it's very well and extensively set. A few weeks ago, probably 1 month ago, I suggest them by mail 4 subjects that it's what the conversation, and it's going to be a very weird conversation because probably we are not going to talk too much. I just left on the mail for those 4 subjects that I have been interested with, asking if they could consider them in their presentation of their architecture. In a way, it's a provocation, but it's very enigmatic or very strange. And I hope it's not going to be too much pretentious. And here we are, just waiting for what how you're going to respond. You responded already by mail, very, very clean. And what I sent it was much more messy. And I don't know what's going to happen. But anyway, I'm going to read in Spanish the 4 subjects. It's going to be a resume. El primero es una...
They will be the same 4 subjects.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Let's say yes. El primero es un artículo de Enrique Vilamatas del 19 de febrero de este año, en el que tiene una conversación con esta cantidad de autores que conoce muy bien y con los que comparte tantas cosas. Era Jean Echenoz, y se ve que la conversación giraba en torno a un mismo y único tema: el horror y el absurdo de las entrevistas en las que se espera que el autor de un libro explique lo que ha escrito. Eso iba por si acaso se podía utilizar en el mundo de la arquitectura, de la que todos somos sufridores para poderla explicar cuando nos piden que demos charlas, etc. Y decía, bueno, que ejemplos podía verlos como el de Marcel Proust, imaginándolo rodeado de periodistas al que le estarían exigiendo que explicara científicamente por qué una magdalena sumergida en el té puede hacernos viajar al pasado. Decía que en otra conversación con Julio Ramón Ribeiro, que se pasaba la vida respondiendo a preguntas, dando explicaciones sobre sus libros, lo que probaría que a la gente le interesaba tanto o más las opiniones del autor como sus libros. Dice, al final, Ribeiro tenía presente que una buena obra no tiene explicación, una mala obra no tiene excusa y una obra mediocre carece de todo interés. En otra conversación una conversación de John Ashbery y Kenneth Koch en 1965 en Tucson, en Arizona, uno de los dos bostezó y el otro le dijo, pero ¿puedo saber por qué te aburres? Y me parece Ashbery le dijo, lo que decías se parecía demasiado a cómo hablan los artistas cuando pretenden explicar su arte. Y yo pienso que es muy difícil ser un buen artista y ser capaz de explicar de manera inteligente tu trabajo. De hecho, lo peor de tu arte siempre es aquello de lo que resulta más fácil hablar. Después, el segundo tema era la navaja de Ockman, que es de un escolástico del siglo XIII que se llamaba Guillermo Ockman, y en el que decía, así resumido, que la explicación más simple y suficiente es la más probable, más necesariamente la verdad, no la necesariamente verdadera. Esto venía a veces cuando se escribe, mucha gente, algún amigo aconseja, léete esto porque seguro que te irá bien para ir reduciendo o limpiando palabras para que el resto sea lo más claro posible. Y ayer, en una conversación entre Gonzalo Tavares y en el CCCB con Enrique Vilamatas, Tavares decía, yo empiezo escribiendo 300 páginas y poco a poco va pasando a 200, a 100, a 50, a veces me quedo con 5 o 6. Y Vilamatas le respondió, dice, bueno, yo en realidad no escribo, solo corrijo. Luego hay otro, el tercer punto, es el libro, sacado del libro de las entrevistas de Francis Bacon con David Sylvester. Es un libro que lo encontré online, lo tengo en italiano, pero bueno, con muchas anotaciones, porque es un libro extraordinario. Y en la En la solapa del libro dice el editor que the extraordinarily revealing interviews with Francis Bacon couldn't over a period of 25 years, van del 1962 a 1986, by the distinguished art critic David Sylvester, amount to a unique statement by Bacon on his art and on art in general. As a discussion of the problems of making art, the book has been widely influential not only among artists, but among writers and musicians, including David Bowie, who named it among his favorite books. Luego, en algunos puntos, en la entrevista, que es la sexta de 1979, le dice Sylvester, busca alguna cosa no esperada, quiere sorprenderse a sí mismo. Bacon contesta, naturalmente, porque ¿cómo podría continuar pintando de otro modo? Sylvester dice, ahora está claro que en todo arte hay una mezcla de intención y de alguna cosa que coge al artista de sorpresa. Bacon, sí, sin la intención del artista no me pongo ni siquiera a trabajar. Sylvester, esto que usted parece afirmar es que en su caso la sorpresa se imponga a la intención más bien pronto. Bacon dice, se parte con una intención, pero en realidad las cosas ocurren mientras se está trabajando en la pintura. Y es por esto, por lo que es tan difícil hablar de ello, ocurren mientras se trabaja. Cuando se trabaja se sigue esta especie de nube de sensaciones que se tiene dentro, pero no se sabe lo que es, y se llama instinto. Sigue Bacon, pienso que una parte grandísima de la creación ha nacido también de la autocrítica del artista, y pienso que muy a menudo, probablemente, si un artista parece mejor que otro, es porque posee un sentido crítico más agudo. No se dice que tenga mayor talento, puede ser que tenga solo un sentido crítico mejor. Y nunca sabrá, sigue Bacon, si tenía razón o no, porque después de todo hace falta demasiado tiempo para saber si una cosa ha tenido éxito o no. Y la cuarta es esta cosa del espíritu, el fantasma del tiempo de la ópera o de la época, que en alemán es el Zeitgeist, y que parece sugerir una especie de polen en el que inconscientemente estamos inmersos y que se transpira en el trabajo de muchas disciplinas. Y no estoy hablando de falsas modas. Todo esto, que es un popurrí de 4 elementos que a veces no casan, pero en el fondo en mi cabeza han casado y no sé si los he explicado, se lo mandé en inglés perfectamente. And that's what I throw it, and I don't know how it's going to be the answer. Well, just say anything.
Okay. Okay, well, we took those 4 questions, and actually John did a lot of work in putting together a selection of our work, which we are going to use examples of our work in an effort to answer the questions. While they're doing that, I'll explain. So the first question about the writer who was annoyed at being asked to explain his work and said that a good work doesn't have an explanation. And Elias was wondering, did we think that an architect could share that annoyance? And I would say we approach our projects with an open mind and we try to discover the subject through design. But a work of architecture has so many factors and so many aspects that feed into the making of it that, in a way, in order to sustain it and develop it, it needs to have a certain element of explanation, including explanation between the people who are the team who are going to make it. So a writer has full autonomy in the sense of being on his or her own in a room writing a book. I think in order for a work of architecture to have autonomy, which it must have, it takes a lot of people working together and understanding each other to maintain that. So we were going to talk about some projects and talk about aspects of the projects which are part of the story which we tell ourselves, and we tell the client and we tell the builder and the other members of the team in order to make a project which can bring together all these aspects. So one thing that we talk about is the idea, a sense of a piece of work having what we call here-ness, which is the feeling of belonging in its place, and there-ness, which is the physical presence of an object. So in the case of this is a house that we finished in Dublin, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, which was on a very beautiful site on the edge of the city looking over the sea. And so the first day we visited the site, we went to meet the client and to see the place. And the place was high up, looking down the sea in the distance, and the client was a family who were moving back from London, a couple with three small children, three little girls. And they wanted to make a different kind of life in Dublin, and they wanted to enjoy the sense of the landscape on the coast on the edge of the city. So these drawings, well, the drawing on the right is the developed plan, but the other drawings are drawings that John and I made as we were kind of bringing together our own sense of what this project was about. And the ones at the top are my watercolor sketches, which I made when we visited the site. And they started as being drawings about the landscape, because it's a grassy place with big outcrops of granite rock, very beautiful. So the first drawings were about just the rock and the grass. And then I realized they were kind of becoming drawings of a description of a building. And at the same time, John made the drawing on the left, which is, I don't know, it's a summary of the site, the client, our response to the site. So this house ended up being called after this drawing, The Sleeping Giant. This is a drawing of a big giant lying on this site asleep, with his head, his eye facing out towards the sea, his stomach in the middle, his body, the stomach is the kitchen, and then three legs, because there was three little girls and they were going to have these bedrooms here. And the plan of the house, which is on the right, responds very much to the outcrops of rock, to the physicality of the site, but also to this first idea about the rooms. That's the rock.
This is the rock that I just draw rocks faster than Sheila. It's the same rock.
Yeah. So
And
in
this,
a sense,
and this is the house.
so this is the house, which
that is the rock.
is made of, so it's made of concrete, which is with a granite aggregate. So the granite in the concrete is the material of the site, and the render is a lime render with granite sand. And the forms of the house, in a way, are like the forms of the site, and the roof is concrete. So when you come from above and look down, it's like a kind of another rock outcrop. So in a sense, that is about place, it's about the people, it's about a kind of atmosphere or character that we're trying to bring to this building. And a little bit later, we built this project in London, Student Centre, in a very downtown part of historic London. And in a way, some of the subject was the same. We were there trying to distill our sense of London into this building. It was the first new building we had built in London, and we were well, it was a competition, in fact, so we had to compete for this. But we wanted to make a building that felt really of London, and it's for the students in the London School of Economics, and their campus is a piece of city. It's not, the campus is a public place with streets and buildings, and the students move in the public streets, and then this building was the centre where their social and other aspects are. So we were trying to make a building in brick. We knew from the moment we saw the site we wanted to work in brick, and then we had to respond to a lot of really complex site conditions about dimensions and setbacks and light. So this is the thing about the story and the filtering, that you have to take all of the complexities and somehow merge them in your mind and in your discussion. So again, actually, my drawing on the right was one of the competition drawings I made, and on the left is an early sketch that John made about this. The site is a triangle, and that's quite difficult, designing a building on a triangular site, with some of the rooms are quite big, but some of them are quite loose fit. So in this sketch, we're showing that the idea is that the building is on the left, and that the streets, all the little streets, are the world the students move in, and that somehow there's a kind of force of movement, of connection as the students come down these streets towards this building, which creates a space, which is this triangular space on the site, which is also shown in my perspective drawing, which has got a glass roof. And we were thinking on the one hand about the plan and about the movement and about the geometry, but also about how a building like this, in a place like this, will be experienced in perspective, not as a whole building, but just seen in glimpses down the street. So we kind of designed it. So it was a 6-week competition design process, and we designed the building through these views, thinking about how you would experience the building not as a whole thing, but as a part of the city. So in a way, the concerns are very similar. We wanted this sense of here-ness and there-ness, as in the house, but the issues were different because it's a much bigger building. It's a kind of public building. And then the thing about material or matter or the stuff from which the building is made is really important. So we, very early on in the competition, we were thinking about different ways of using brick, either as a solid mass or pulling it apart with these perforations to let light through and views out, with timber windows between. So we were trying to think about, in contemporary construction, what is the most authentic way to use brick, but also trying to think of in a way, a kind of new way to use brick as to make a building that has a very singular presence. And then when we won the competition, which took 6 weeks, then it took about 4 years, of course, to make all the details and to work with the craftspeople and with our design team to make a building using the brick in that way. And it's got more than 100 special brick types and beautiful handmade bricks. But in order to achieve what seems like a simple idea, it takes a lot of working and actually a lot of explanation, I have to say. And I think another very important thing we would say about our work is that we think of the buildings we make as extending beyond their own boundary. So the world beyond the building, outside the door, in this case the covered canopy, but also that we designed in the end the landscape outside. And there are these seats which are tree planters and lights which we also designed, which in a way are almost like parts of the building, figures of the building coming outside and occupying the space beyond. I think that also, that sense of the building and the city being in a kind of conversation and exchange and not having an absolute hermetic boundary is important.
So to remind you again that if I'm following Elias's script here, a good work does not have an explanation. I was thinking maybe that Dennis Lasdon used to say that architecture can't really be discussed. The idea is you go and see the building, and as Lasdon says, if the building has anything to say, it'll speak for itself. But in a way, you see, we've known Elias a long time, and every time we meet, all we do is talk about buildings anyway, and mostly he's telling me buildings that I've never seen, that I have to go and see, and then he explains them to me about what I should think about them before I see them. And then I tell him about something, and then we meet a little while later and I still haven't seen it, or something has changed, but the conversation goes on about architecture. And what I think is so beautiful about this way that he's responded to your question is by avoiding the question, to set a question and avoid the interview. And then by him asking the questions, it gives us the perfect opportunity to avoid the answer, and therefore we can continue as we always do. But I was thinking about explaining, because Sheila was saying we have to explain ourselves a lot, and so we do. It's the condition of our existence. We are not protected like those other people she's discussing, or your novelist, the man Elias made up for this question. But I'm thinking different. I think in a way our work is also explaining itself to itself. And so I just thought maybe I should describe this project in terms of the things that the project is saying to itself about its own situation. That is to say, if you were to go like Lasdon advises, and if the building were to speak for itself, this might be what it would say for itself. One thing it would say for itself is that it's surrounded by trees and it wants to get away from being in conflict with the trees. And so this gallery building in the university in Cork has a very narrow foundation, and then it spreads out among the trees so that it doesn't influence the roots of the trees. You remember the roots of the trees extend in the ground in the same way as the canopy of the trees extend in the air. So when I'm drawing this, what I'm trying to say is that the gallery will be among the trees, but its footprint will be small. So we, therefore, in the course of that explanation, we developed a building that was floating in the air, that wanted to be floating in the air. And then the next thought was that in order to experience this building, which is up in the air, that perhaps you should pass through it in order to feel that you're within it when you're outside it, or when you're within it, that you still are without it. So this feeling of what George Harrison called in his song, Within You, Without You, you know, the space between us all. We are talking about the space between us all, as the Beatles would say. I think that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to push the building out of the way and say, look, there's the river. Or make you think that the building is saying, look, there's the river. So the building is explaining the site to you. The building is saying the ground continues from the cliff down to the water. The gallery is really lost in the trees. And between the two, a space opens up, which is the space of invitation, the space of the in-between that Sheila is talking about at the LSE. So our buildings are busy talking away to themselves. And of course as well, I mean, they're talking to Elias too, but they're talking to all the other architects who we've ever met and all the other buildings we've ever seen. So obviously this building is having a kind of a, what's the word, baby talk relationship with the Carpenter Centre. It has, it has an uncle in Mendelssohn, probably. It has family relationships with the Russians. It's an innocent building that pretends to know a lot. And now it's old and it's weathering, and even the trees around it start speaking the building's language, which is good, I think. And very near there now, just on site, on the opposite side of the same campus, we're working with this building, which is one of the oldest buildings in the campus, built in the 1850s. And we have to turn it into a student activity centre, what they call a student hub. So on the one hand, we have to clear out the old structure to open it up to itself. And on the other, we have to add something new to gather the students' activities together. And the way we thought we could do this is by making a big hole in the old building. You see where the chimney is? It's not a natural thing to do that to that building, and we have made that building suffer for this, but it's going to sustain it in its long life. Because at the back, we're adding something that holds it together. So you see we're cutting a hole, this is the first floor plan, but we're cutting a hole through here and pulling people through the building and then wrapping them round into this big hall that is being made to gather all the students together in the behind of the building. But then this is our new bit here. This is our new passageway through the building. But you see that this building he's now talking back to the first building, the 20 years ago gallery building that I showed you first. And they're kind of connected by a new bridge we've just finished. So in our minds, the quadrangle of the college is the important fact. And our buildings, our projects are in conversation, in supporting conversation with the sublime fact of the south-facing quadrangle of the original building. So when you go, if you go to Cork to visit these buildings, maybe they will explain themselves to you.
So Elias's second question is related to what he calls Occam's razor, which is to say that simpler explanations are more likely to be correct. And he asks us, how can the process of selecting and finding a solution be useful in architecture? Simple, clear, or straightforward, complex, or complicated? Now, I have to say, the more I've been thinking about this talk, all of the questions have kind of merged it together into one question for me. I'm not really able to separate them, and that may be because when you start talking about buildings, in a way the issues do overlap a lot. But I think that we would say it takes a long time and a lot of work for things to seem effortless or simple, that simple solutions are probably developed through complexity. And very often complex site conditions lead very much to a solution which is simple in use, although it may not appear simple when you see it first. So this house, which we finished 20 years ago, I think, which is a small house in a long, narrow plot behind a street in a little town in Ireland, had very, very clear restrictions in the site. The site is very narrow with high walls on either side, and then there's a big level change of 1 story across the site. And the access was under another building through from this side. So in the end, to make a house with proper size rooms, because the site was quite narrow, maybe less than 6 meters, we split it into 2 parts, and we made the house into almost, and it's a very small house, it's about 100 square meters, but we made it like a little town in a way. So the living room and the kitchen, which is very small, are on this side under a kind of concrete roof, like a kind of cave, opening into a courtyard across a little tower of 3 floors, which is 3 bedrooms. So it's very small, but in a sense, the clients are cooks, and it was behind their restaurant, and they liked to be outside a lot. They always went outside between cooking. So we discussed a lot with them, was it really going to work in Ireland, in our climate, to go to bed every night by walking outside across the courtyard? And they said, yeah, that's fine, we're happy. And so it's fine, they did that. But in a sense, it allowed the house to feel much bigger because it has this connection. It claims the outdoor space. The outdoor space becomes a room in the house, and it's how they work. And we always felt this project was probably one of the moments in our work where we felt a kind of turning point about a clarity of purpose or intent, about taking something like a traditional Irish tower house in stone and transforming it into go on. So we always felt we'd like to expand those ideas, and then well, actually around the same time probably we started on this project in Cork in the south of Ireland, which is, we love working in Cork, which is where the university is as well, because it has amazing topography, and Dublin, where we live, is completely flat. So Cork has hills, and this photograph is taken looking down the hill on which the school, St. Angela's College, is located. So the school is on the right, behind that kind of red wall. I mean, incidentally, we're now working on a project on the left behind the blue wall, which is a boys' school. The one behind the kind of pink wall is a girls' school. Anyway, so in this place, there was these site restrictions here were, ridiculous. I mean, it was just an incredibly difficult site. It was very steep. It was an 18-meter drop, but also it was very inaccessible. And there was only one place that the neighbouring street was at the same level as the site, so you could only come in one place. And then there were 4 historic buildings which we had to keep, which were protected structures. And the girls' school was already on the site and had been there for 150 years. So they also had a lot of emotional attachment to the place and its nature. And in this case, because the school was already there and because they were in this extreme situation, they were used to going in and out between buildings. But now they wanted a lot more accommodation, they wanted proper science rooms, and they wanted a very big sports hall. And maybe that was the biggest challenge, to find one very big space on such a complicated site. So you might have seen the dates. This was 1999 to 2016, and probably was the longest project we ever worked on. But that's because a lot of complications in the budget and in the Department of Education. So actually that gave us time to really think about how to make something on this site. And
simple.
There was no way it was going to be simple in the sense of being one building. So it was always had to have a complexity. But what we're trying to do then is to, in the model here, so what we did was to put the sports hall in the lowest part of the site, and then the roof of the sports hall becomes an outdoor playground, and then the rest of the building builds up behind that, and the old buildings are between the new. So the old buildings are here and here, and our new buildings kind of weave between them. And then, so in a way that the idea of the project is probably best described either in, these drawings are a bit fuzzy, but in 3 dimensions or in sections. So The drawing in the middle, this is pulling the project apart. At the top are the old buildings which we had to keep, the historic buildings. In the middle is the landscape that we made through connecting the old and the new. And the entrance is on this level at the top there. The only place you could enter the site was in this one place here. So you came in there, and then we made, here is the combination of the old and new buildings. And then what we're trying to do is to build the new as close as possible to the old, so you get these very narrow gaps and spaces between, to give the kind of character and atmosphere of a hill town. Did I miss the section? Sorry, I just have to go back to here, just before. I mean, in a way, this is the idea of the building. When we started working on it, because there was a lovely garden here and different courtyards, I decided early on that we should make a rule that we should be able to walk from the top garden through all of the outdoor spaces right down to the bottom where there's a performance space without going inside. So so you should be able to move outside, but also you have to be able to go without going outside. So if it's really windy and wet, so there are bridges and connections. So our architecture is about making a kind of world, so there's a bridge, the world that goes under and over to make a kind of new place, like a new town. And then there's this one very big space at the bottom of the hill, which is the sports hall, which has got bright daylight, which is here. And outside that is the big steps which lead up to the old building and is the kind of forum and heart of the school. So it's a building that's simple in use, but is very complex in its parts. But if you're in the garden at the top of the site, looking back down over the city, it's very simple. There's the science block with its laboratories, with flues coming out through the roof, and then you see the sports hall on top of the sports field on top of the sports hall. So it's a world.
So I guess if that building was explaining itself to itself, it would just simply say that a school is a little town. Simpler explanations are more likely to be correct. We have sometimes, in less friendly forums, found ourselves asked why our buildings are so complicated. And I don't know if that's why Elias asked us that question. We think our buildings are, and that's why I use that Einstein reference, that as simple as possible, but no simpler, We think our buildings are simple, meaning that we think they're intuitive to be used. And in a weird way, maybe through working with existing buildings, we found that if the building offers a little bit of resistance, that is to say, if the building has a little bit of demand, then it's easier to find your way, because the irregularity becomes involving. You see the stairs, or you see your way, or things aren't simply set down abstractly. They are inviting you to continue. So in this building, which is a completely interior developed project that we made about 10 years ago, it all starts within a courtyard that we made because the limits of the site were so confining that there was no way of approaching the site except from one end. So we wanted to imagine that you actually start in the middle. It's just start in the middle and work your way out as if you were born inside the site, as if the project was born inside the site. And then people use it like that. People gather like it's a medieval hall. So it's not to show you this project, but it's to show you that sometimes even a geometrically complex project has got a simple soul inside itself. And this was useful to us when we came to do perhaps the most complicated project that we have yet to do, which is complicated in so many ways. A building we finished, or rather, we didn't know we were finished it. We thought we were working on it. A building we finished recently in Budapest. And because it's it's a whole university campus. It's for a whole university campus community, and it's in a very complicated site. We were just very impressed that it was on the Danube, and the Danube in our, school child geography class memories has such an important resonance, even a poetic resonance. And so we were determined that our new building would would know that it was on the Danube. You know, the Danube would register the Danube as the Danube went by. So our first move was really to re-emphasize that street, which had been forgotten in Budapest, and we said, look, every street faces the Danube, not only the Basilica of St. Istvan, but also this minor street. So we tried to pull the street right into the university campus and tried to push the university right out onto the street. And the center line of that street, the very center line of the building, it's 25 meters by 25 meter facade, and it's folded in the center like because it knows that Danube is on the end of the axis. I guess we have the thought that buildings themselves, which carry thoughts in themselves, buildings are vessels of thought, and they embody thought, and they in that sense they're alive inside. You know, the organism of the building has intelligence built into it, and this building knows it's on the Danube, and it is hit. It's been hit in the face by the force of that knowledge. And then on the other side of it, from the inside of that, it surrenders space in order to bring the other buildings in the street, and then it's made in stone so that it belongs in the architecture of the street. So it will get old in the same way as the old buildings are already old. It's involved, if you know what I mean. Anyway, this building works its way from the inside out, despite the Danube, notwithstanding. And what we were so impressed by when we went to Budapest was all these. I mean, if ever you go to Budapest, every plot has its own courtyard. And the more luxurious the plot, the more courtyards it has. I mean, there's a house here that has 7 courtyards in a row, and it is known as the house of 7 courtyards. So we just said to them, you don't need any ideas at all. Because they said, the rule of the competition was perhaps you would keep the facades of the buildings, and most of the other architects in the competition tore down all the buildings behind to make a space in here, so that the crust would be kept and the new university would. And we just said, we don't need this. You don't need the ideas are all in the buildings already. All you have to do is introduce them to each other. I still think this is the most important drawing that we made for this project. This one, the red arrows. But saying that means that this building has to suffer, for its own good. And there were some very interesting moments when they were doing this.
It turned out not to be as well built as we had thought.
Yeah, it's all right now.
Yeah.
So we thought that you could break through its disconnected parts in 3 dimensions, up and down, and connect all of its isolated courtyards into one kind of city, inside itself, that the passages and courts would make the university. And so that this is one of the first sketches Sheila made away from the site. Mm. And then, years later, all it does is kind of build that thought within the site that the old buildings have got people moving through them, and the windows are opened and the courtyards are breathing, and that the movement is intense, and you can cross the courtyard through its glass roof and out the other side, this bridge being this bridge, and climb your way to a roof garden and explore the skyline of this amazing city, and that in some way that will mean that the courtyards will come to life. And then you cross into the new bit, the old building and the new building, and that you cross into the old building across that stairs and then into the new building. And the new building has got 3 or 4 courtyards to organize itself around. And here's the force it can't forget. And but let me just say about simple and complex, because this is the question. If you look in this corner up here, in the crack between the new and the old And we made one new stair, which slipped a new stair. And then if you look in this area of the plan down below, we made a spiral stair. So there are there are several new stairs, but these two are different. There's a kind of a concrete stair that works against the old brick wall. And then there's the stairs that slipped in between the new and the old. So whatever about simplicity, when we went to your Gaudi house, that thing you did to that Gaudi house, we felt that, you too had made buildings suffer for their own good. It's hard to bring up a good building these days. And what we were trying to do was to bring them together, bring our ideas together with what exists, and to make a new relationship so that the old thing can become young again. Rediscover the old. Now, we thought we would continue. This is the thing we finished on the main street, and we thought we would continue to bring the university right through its own self and reveal it on the other side of the block with a building for smaller scale academic offices. But things have changed in those 5 years in Budapest, and now our innocent university has become the center of an enormous political conflict between liberalism and the opposite. So I don't know.
So the third question was about you have an intention, but what really comes about through work. And I suppose this is about doing and thinking in our work. And I think maybe just two quite simple projects that we were doing at the same time we'll use to illustrate this, that sometimes it's just through looking and continuing to draw and analyse the context. When you're trying to make something, I think here the first one is a social housing project in Dublin, and the second one John's going to show was done at exactly the same time in a similar area on the other side of the city. So there are two projects in two working class areas in Dublin. And this one was for housing, social housing, about 50 apartments and a social space. So we were really trying to make an ordinary Dublin building. I mean, that was our starting point, to make something just feels like part of the city that people live in. And we were thinking about the scale of Georgian Dublin, which is about 4 or 5 story brick buildings. And we wanted just to make something that felt as much part of the city as those do in terms of their people's identification of the city of Dublin. But we also wanted to respond to the specifics of this site. And you can see in the photograph that there are some remains of early, maybe late 18th, early 19th century industrial buildings, little towers, to do with a distillery that was built there belonging to a family across the road. So we were working on between a kind of residential and early industrial context. And the sketch on the left is maybe about trying to summarise the intention, and this is about the thing of intention, that the intention is to make about a 4-story building in brick, which would have some primary elements which give it scale, like entrances and staircases and terraces set back. But knowing that the reality of making 50 very small apartments is the building would become much more complex with lots of windows and complexities and stuff. And the context is that there's a big area of houses in the city, which are all in the drawing on the left of our project and going on for quite a bit beyond that. And in a way, when we were and then Dublin City Council were putting through a new road, which was a kind of, it's a bit of an act of aggression. They're putting this big wide road through, which they said was a street, but really it's a road full of cars. And so our site was created by the introduction of this road. And we wanted to feel like the project we were making was belonging to all these houses. And it's almost like there's a kind of waves of houses coming along like the sea, and then this new road is like a coastline or an edge, and we had to build a specific edge to that. And but we also knew we wanted to make a social space where the people who live there would be able to communicate and relate to each other outside. And we wanted to protect them from the street and the noise and the traffic, but also to allow some sunshine in, because north is this way and the sun is from the side. So we spent a long time thinking about how to make this space, and then one day just working over and over. We worked over the historic maps a lot, and the lane that's up there was always there for 200 or 300 years. We wanted to make a pedestrian way through. But we realised that if we made this building parallel to this street and the other building parallel to the top street, that gave us this triangular space. So in a way, it's a project that wanted to have a space that was protected, but the space evolved by just simply drawing over and over and thinking about the context and coming up with this. And then I suppose that the building is, it's repetitive, but every time it turns a corner, it has to do special things in order to be continuous, because we wanted to build a continuous brick building that goes around corners and has a kind of singularity. And then we wanted to make big openings, as in the first sketch, with double height terraces, so that the terraces, which are recessed, and the building has a kind of planar quality, so it doesn't have projecting balconies, it has terraces, but they're high enough to let sunshine and daylight in. So we're making a kind of composed facade relating and responding to the scale of the rooms in the building and to the scale of the city, and then thinking about how people live there, that how they relate in this section to the shared space between, and everybody has a big roof terrace either on the east or the west, and if your terrace is facing the back, you get a little projecting kind of winter garden, so that everyone has a social engagement with the space in the middle, which you can see in the photograph here. So it's a place where children play and people shout, come out and talk to each other from above. And then we're really working with the kind of plane of the building to try and make it have this surface quality. And so we worked with models where we thought about how the terraces and balconies pushed into the surface rather than pushing out in the space. So we got this kind of tautness and sense of brick surface, which the Georgian houses in the city have. And then the building sits in a way in the landscape of the city with its big sloping roof, which is part of its response to the context and to the orientation, as just a part of the ordinary city.
And
Sorry, speeding up because we're
at the same time
slow.
as this, are we taking too long to
Yes.
answer these questions? We can speed up. Yeah,
Yes.
we can go faster. Okay. At the same time as this project, and the reason we're saying this because he's asking us what really happens when you're working. And we thought it was interesting to show you two projects we made at exactly the same time, designing them together in the city, in our own city of Dublin. They're in totally different places, but they're both community projects, and they're quite different, but they come out of the same thought process. So they're affected by where they stand, I think. This one is down in the docks, and I just wanted to say that we had a first principle here, which was that we would introduce the idea of a kind of forest garden into an industrialized docklands landscape, that we would bring the local community together in this idea of shared, as if they shared the forest that was there before. And, they were looking for a third space, not a place to live, not a place to work, but a kind of in-between space, a community space. So we proposed this. They live, you can see all the railway tracks of the docklands, and all bound by those railway tracks are 1,800 houses, two-storey houses. And all these people are kind of ex-dockers now, disoriented from that lifestyle, and around them are new development of kind of glassy, corporate Dublin. And they wanted something that would rise out of the ground and express their strength. So we proposed a garden, and they liked that idea, but they didn't think it was visible enough. They thought it was invisible. Mm. So when we went with our garden, they said, no, we need to be as tall as the church was. Nobody goes to the church anymore. So Sheila made this sketch to say, well, I suppose we could make a tall building. And so our project is making these four divisions for children, old people, sports, and drama. Drama because this is the part of the city that Sean O'Casey, the playwright, came from. And that the fifth element would be what they wanted, which is to have identity in the town. And so developing it in this conversation from this kind of first principles outset, where the four parts of the project are divided by the geometry of the site. Each part has its own garden. The old people look across the garden to the children play. The children look across to the people coming in. The old people watch the street. And the whole point converges here where the first photograph was, where you're between the inside and the outside. But in the end, that works fine, and it gives you this world, which was the world we wanted them to have. This is the convergent point of the 4 axes. But really, they wanted to be present in the city, and so this identity question came up. So I don't know if that talks about what really happens when you're working. But maybe what happens when you're working is you discover things when you're working that aren't the things you had in your mind before you started working. The work itself opens up new questions. We were going to finish just by showing you 2 current projects. And we put our Christmas cards up here like stamps on a postcard to Elias, sending him his own question back. But Sheila's going to introduce this, and then I'm going to finish.
So this, it's 2 buildings, but they're in the same project in London on the Olympics site. And we did a competition with Allies and Morrison and Architecturia, who are from Girona, near here. So the 3 of us worked together on the competition design for the master plan for a residential and culture quarter on quite a small site opposite the Olympic Stadium in London. So the site, this piece of land here is the site, which is a small, long, narrow site, but it faces onto the River Lee, which is an important river in the minds of people in the East End of London. It has a lot of significance. So on the site there's residential, and then there are 4 cultural buildings: the V&A Museum, which we're designing, which John's going to talk about, the London College of Fashion, and the BBC, which Allies and Morrison are designing, and then the Theatre for Satyr's Wells Dance, which I will talk about, which is next door to Zaha Hadid's Aquatic Centre. And then the residential, we designed the tower at this end of the residential. So in a way it was a very exciting project. For us, we're designing the end, the middle, and the other end. But I'm trying to think about the zeitgeist.
Your chair back, or okay.
I suppose there's a few things in this. One is these buildings are all facing a river, and there's an interest in public, cultural, external space, but the site is very small. So we're trying to get as much space in as we can. And then there's also an interest in a kind of accessibility in the psychologically accessible as much as physically accessible buildings for culture, and the extension of the building outside beyond. So the building I'm going to talk about is the Sadler's Wells Dance Theatre on the corner of this big bridge. And I mean, this building is very much a building designed around the idea of a place that's ready for work. It's almost like a manifestation of its parts. So it demonstrates the parts that are in it. So it's got 6 dance studios, it's got a flexible dance performance space, which is but a huge stage, and then it's got a kind of public room, which is like a foyer, but also has community dance and other aspects to it. So we were thinking, what's a dance theatre, and how does it express itself? And we're very interested in these diagrams that choreographers make about dance and movement, and this is actually an Andy Warhol drawing, but this is how people draw dance steps, and the idea of rhythm and movement and the sort of definition of things. So we're thinking that the dance studios facing the river each has a sawtooth high-level north light, and then you come around the corner past the service element, and there's more dance studios here opening onto the terrace. So the studios kind of express themselves, and they wrap around the fly tower, which is the high piece at the back, which is in a way the centre or the core of the building, which is a dark space. And then at the public level, there is a foyer that wraps. So you can see in this plan that the auditorium is at the back where service comes in from the street below. There's a big level change on the site, so the stage is way below the public level. And then the public space, which in that sketch plan is like a series of interconnected rooms for activities and movement, for eating and drinking. There's a community dances in the corner here. There are 2 entrances, and there's this very big riverside terrace. And in a way, thinking about the zeitgeist and whether this building is of its time, in a way, the way we're thinking about this reminds me very much of the very first public building we ever did, the Irish Film Centre, and the idea we had about foyer and movement is similar. And in a sense, I think the conversation is also with your own past work. So what's interesting about dance studios is that although they're very light people dancing, because of the vibrations, they need enormous structure. So these huge concrete beams that define our foyer below are holding up the dance studios. And this building is very much designed around the kind of rhythm and the repetition of the dance studios. And also, dance studios are very specific. They must be rectangular. They have very fixed dimensions. So the building has a kind of clarity that comes out of the parts that it's made out of. And then we've tried to develop that by taking a section through the other way, that we've got a portico with daylight coming down, which gives you a covered outdoor space, and the beams come through and support this canopy, and then the spaces are sometimes single height with a cafe bar and sometimes double height with a terrace and studios overlooking the centre. So it's very much a building that's a kind of, as I said, it's a kind of kit of parts, and then at the public level then it's fully glazed on two sides, so you can see in and you can go in, and the sign over the door says "You are welcome" instead of the name of the building, so that the client has a very overt intention of making the building something that feels like it belongs in its place and belongs to its community. And approached from the other side with the stadium and Zaha's building here, you approach it from the side of the fly tower, and we've really enjoyed working on the sort of solidity of the brick and trying to sculpt the chimneys and the extract so that the brick is in a way worked as something which expresses its weight on the side where the building is closed.
I think we're going to finish with this one project that we're working on at the moment, and we're in the happy situation at this moment in our lives of having two projects on the same site but joining each other, and that we can pretend that one of them belongs to Sheila and one of them belongs to me, so our clients feel they're dealing with different architects, but when we go home, they belong to us. And this one is different than the one Sheila discussed. This is a museum for the Victoria and Albert Museum, and which is an intimidating client. But I mean, the history of the whole thing of the museum is extraordinarily interesting. But what's different about the museum compared to the dance is that the dance can be revealed in its elements, and the museum needs to be sheltered, and all of its interest needs to be curated in such a way that the interior belongs to the interior of the museum and has no daylight, it has no presentation to the street. It's effectively a curated black-white box. And what we were trying to do is to find ways to open it up in order to make people feel they could come in. So we thought about this thing about a jacket. You put your jacket on to go out, and we were looking at your man, Balenciaga, and the idea that he had about clothes as form outside the form, the space between, what the Japanese call ma, the distance between the body and the cloak creates a space of its own. And then when this London photographer, Nick Vasey, photographed one of Balenciaga's dresses, you see this beautiful thing of the X-ray of the dress, that you see the structure and the form. So we were trying to make a building that had its own necessary skeletal structure, and that we could put the jacket around. So you see what this works out as is a kind of crust. Here's the requirement for the museum and its service and its delivery and all that it needs. And here's the crust that negotiates its relationship with the outside world and gives its identity. And it's the dance theatre that Sheila was talking about is just at the end down here. And you would come in the door to the museum, and then you would find your way into the pockets of the thickness of the crust. And so you would move. You will move in the thickness of that, and then the spaces are for the gallery curators and the museum curators at 5 stories to inhabit. So here's a building that has a thick crust and a very open structure interior. And we've got ourselves very, very interested in how to make this jacket, and how to move in the thickness of the walls. I think you wouldn't like this staircase either, but you might like being between inside and outside. The feeling of the passage through the thickness, through the stuff of the thing, and. So this has turned into an exercise about drawing, about lines that work with the geometry of the building, about lines that work with the construction of this, in this case, precast concrete, and about lines that vary as the building levels out. You know, the perspectively adjusted geometry. And I think that when it's now on site in London, and we're going to look at, you know, just basically flat fields of concrete at the moment, but there's a feeling in our hearts that we are making something kind of, between these two projects, we're going to make something that is not a betrayal of the things that we have been doing all our working lives. We think there's a bit of a progress to clarity or to, I don't know, identity. But we're, you know, very interested in the idea of doing things we haven't done before. But we're very interested in the idea that they somehow speak to each other in a family familiarity of conversation. Do we think that the pollen of the zeitgeist has any influence on what we do? You work in a dark space, you work in a corner of your own studio, it's very difficult to do anything. And then you look up and you think, I've done it, I've got it, I fucking got it. And then you look around and you realize everybody else is doing that too, you know, and it wasn't, how it took you so long. So you're right. You're right that, in fact, we're not even interested in originality. It just has to make sense to you, you know. It has to belong to you, as well as belonging to its times.
But I think it's very difficult to know exactly what we are looking for.
Yeah.
I don't think there were, in a way there were, in a way there were not questions. There were questions for myself.
Yeah.
That was and I think you were saying very interesting things about, you have changed in a way how to present the work, trying to be involved with this river of strange things that you have found, because I just put it as like a stones in the middle of the process of movement.
Yeah.
But first of all, you have presented the work in a very conventional way, about through slides, through images. I think this is a very old way, in the way that probably many people years ago we were learning just through a black and white picture on a book.
Yeah.
We were not able to travel, we were not able to touch the building, we were not able to understand it.
Yeah.
Just, it was the picture the photographers were very helpful, because probably you were looking at things that were not exactly what they were, but what your imagination is trying to invent through that.
Yeah.
And that's what happens also in reality.
That's right.
You think that you have left something for all the people to use and see. And it's the people uses it and see it in a completely different way.
That's right. That's right.
And that means that probably there is no need just to explain the buildings and just look at what's going to happen with the virtual reality. Now in China, there was a young architect that we talked 2 months ago, has been working for 7 years there, and he was saying that clients go to a studio, to the office of the architect, and they show them the project in virtual reality. Then the client is so impressed. In China, everything is very fast and new, completely everything, it should be different. And the client, when it has the building almost finished, he says, oh, this is very old. We need something much newer. But you really betray me. And that's something that we have lost, all that mystery of things. That probably a non-explanation helps, because you just allow other people to see the work or an image in a completely different way that you are expecting.
Yeah.
we know people that write documents, just an essay on their own work, to force you, to force you, or to force the people who reads it, to have a clear and direct explanation of what the architect wants to have the audience or other people to say about the work. I mean, there is some, and I think,
what's your vision?
I don't know, I'm talking about myself.
Yeah.
Do you think it's better just to put some music and show your projects, let's say a different music for every project? That would be also very nice.
No, but I think...
No, I'm just...
No, I think it's good to... Actually, I think it's important to talk and explain what you really mean to people. And we've always found that with clients, you know, community groups in the remote west of Ireland, or if you really explain what you actually mean, what you mean as an architect, that they understand that and they enjoy that. But I think the thing you're describing, which I was wondering earlier about the zeitgeist, I think maybe the zeitgeist of it now has become, or the context in which we're all working has become the kind of demand that you just described about the VR, the virtual reality model, and that people don't want mystery anymore. People want to know exactly what every single piece of a building is going to feel like, and which is really bad in many ways, I think. First of all, it probably never is going to feel exactly like that, and maybe in the end they'll always prefer the virtual reality to the reality, but also it leaves no room for surprises. And also I think it does, I mean, we were talking earlier about the autonomy of a piece of work. I mean, of course you've got to work with clients and builders and everything has, and regulations, etc. But somehow the work also has to have autonomy that's in itself, which I suppose everyone on the team understands. But if you have to you have to take a camera through every corner of a building that isn't yet built, it's just, there are too many opinions then, and actually things get completely diluted. And I think that's a problem of our time, which isn't, I know it's not what the zeitgeist means, but it is a condition in which architects work. And I think even compared to when we started in practice, that's very different. The people they want to know about everything, and then they have opinions about everything. And in a way, sometimes I think clients act against their own interest because they over-focus on details and they want everything to be different, or this room should be different than that room and that room. And they don't trust the professional who actually does probably understand the entity of something. That's not really an answer to your question, but I think you said it was conventional. I think we would say we are quite conventional, and I think...
Not in a bad way.
No, but I think that we would, exactly as you say, we started our work when we were students. We, spent 1 year being Russian constructivists, living through, we never went there, but we lived through the books, and of course there was no internet then, so it was books, and maybe one man somewhere in Dublin had once been to Russia and he let us see his slides, and then we were Le Corbusier for a few years. That was easier because we could go to those buildings and that was done. But I think that that's really important, the image, the real buildings, but also the images of things as an influence and as the sort of compost that you have to put into your work, the things that are the grounding on which you make work. I mean, buildings always come out of an understanding of other buildings.
But I love what you said about books. I mean, how you discover things through books. I mean, I think we met in the library in our university. We were the two students who didn't do exactly what the staff wanted, and we went to the cinema and we got together in the library looking at the complete works of Corbusier and just looking at how the pages turned and what's on the next page and what's on the last page, and what's opposite the Villa Cook and what's the section of the Citroën house, and so when I'm putting these things together and I'm thinking, how can I get them from there to there, or how do I make that? I mean, I love making slideshow like a movie, and you're supposed to half the time not be listening. You're supposed to just think that reminds you of the last, or there's a connection going on in the when you said this is a conventional thing, I misheard you. I thought you said this is a confessional thing, and then I realized it is a confessional thing, because we're just coming over here to just tell you what's going on inside, you know. Yeah. And in a way, we're lucky in architecture that there are these things called buildings that will live without us, and they survive in the world and they get misunderstood, but they're also living in our heads, I think. And what we have in common, the reason you're all here when you should be at the cinema is, you know, because you too like this feeling that somehow we like to consider buildings as, we like this.
One thing is that we understand each other because we are... No, I don't know. It works. We understand each other because we are able to read. And
yes.
We know what's behind.
Yes.
We know how to read a plan, right. A yes. section. Yes. That's why it put all of us together. And we don't... That's why I'm saying that probably very simple things are enough.
Okay.
Because
so, I mean, we had this in the... One of our clients said to Sheila, one of our clients said to us recently, I don't think I like that bit. You know, this bit. And we just... And then she said, no. And I said, perhaps you will find that you don't have to like every bit.
No.
It might be okay. Because one day, you won't even be here. And the building will be here, and
they are destroyed
very fast. No. Buildings, come on.
No.
Buildings last for all time, forever.
Even
buildings
the
are immortal.
Buildings are turning down.
Clients come and go. They get promoted. They get demoted. They move job. They change interest. The building just goes on. Even the buildings that are knocked down are still eternal. I mean, don't tell me you don't remember buildings that aren't there anymore. In fact, it's easier to remember the buildings that aren't there anymore. But very few people remember the clients who aren't there anymore. Very, very few. Or whether they liked it or not.
Okay, let's go to this another subject about simplicity. I don't think that was not about simplicity. I was thinking while you were explaining the project of the house. I'm sorry.
You need to be up here.
Yes.
Yeah, put them on the table, Sheila.
No, when you were explaining the house, the concrete house.
Yeah.
I was trying to find in mind what it's the Miss Pavilion in Barcelona, a simple building, or it's complex. Yeah. Why? Is Ring Miralles building very complex and probably a simple building? Well, those things I don't think are important.
Yeah.
It's about what they help us to feel.
That's right.
And how much they help cities, public space, urbanity, and citizenship. How much do they produce in those fields for all of us? This is probably when I'm talking about simplicity, was about how much you, in the way of working, how much you erased, which street you take, which branches of a tree that normally you have in front of you. As much as you work, you find ways and ways and ways. That's probably a question that it's at all easy to answer. It's only about the feeling and how to work. That's why.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first public project we did was that I mentioned earlier was the Irish Film Centre, which was an existing building where we reworked and added some pieces, but it was very much within this existing group of old historic buildings. And I think that was really interesting and useful because in a way you have something tangible to start with, which is the old buildings, and they have their own idiosyncratic geometries and stuff. So there's a lot of measuring and observing and photographing and drawing, and you really work out of the old building. And in a way it kind of teaches, it feels like in the one way that it is a rational process, but you know that every time you make a decision, you could have made another one. So you can post-rationalise, even working with an old building, the reasons you did things. But actually, I mean, the thing you're saying with the branches of the trees, in every project, there are multiple moments that come where you do something that in one way seems logical, but you actually know you could have done something different, and then it goes off in one direction and you can't go back to the other options. But I think working with the old building also taught us that there are relationships between things which have a kind of atmosphere which are not absolutely rational and the work of one person's mind, but that they are in some way more complex. And I think we now, even when we're working with a new building, we're always looking for the marks or the evidence on the site of what was there before, what the neighbouring buildings are like, so that we're always trying to respond to a lot of factors, because I think it gives you a more rich and more interesting building. It's not exactly answering your question, but I think, I think unless you're doing a certain kind of very rational gridded architecture, there probably aren't. There are lots of steps you take which are jumps. You get to a point and then you just make a jump of imagination and you do something.
Yeah, but the process of designing, it's in a way, it's working with a very complex, a very big number of items that sometimes are very contradictory between themselves.
Yeah,
They're not.
This
is not clear.
I think there's some feeling that you want to bring the thing, talking about simplicity, that you want to bring the thing to form, so that when it comes to form, that it's this and not that. This is this, it's not that. So you kind of when you call about the branches, thinning out the branches to reveal the form. Of course you can do. You can do a lot of different things, but in some way to make a piece of work, it's also very important what you don't do in order to bring the thing to its clarity and its form. And Sheila has this term that she has lately adopted, which we're doing something and Sheila says, it's not utter. The utter, it has to be utter, which is that it has to be, it's so much itself that it doesn't have anything extraneous in it.
Well, it's very personal, the way how everybody works.
Yeah.
But for instance, myself, I don't trust myself very often.
Yeah.
It's in a way that I'm constantly changing, just because probably I'm more lost than other people.
Yeah.
There is other people who is much easier to find a way that it's their personal way. But I think there is a personal way that has no personality.
So I tell you, when I met him first in Dublin, he came to do a lecture in Dublin, which he doesn't remember, or he denies that he says this, but I felt I loved him like a brother when he said this thing. Maybe not an older brother, but he's getting younger, my brother. But he said this thing. Somebody asked him, your work, this one doesn't look like this one, and the new work doesn't look like the old work, and this doesn't look like that. And Elías said, I was just sitting in the audience, like you, and he said, we are surrounded by so many complexities, of so many demands, of so many constraints, and so many things that are forcing us into corners that I have to find a way out. So he said, in all these situations, I'm looking at this and I'm just looking for the gap. And when you said that, which
the gap to escape.
The gap to escape.
Yeah.
I just thought I have to get to know this man better. I have to get to know him better. Because I think this feeling, where's the space to move in? It's just that's the kind of moment. And then it takes 5 years to hold that thought. And then you finish it, and then you move on to something else.
Just to forget what you have done
what
before.
It is, exactly. Exactly. So it's on that slim introduction that our relationship is developed.
Well, thank you for coming, and thank you for the presentation.